In the early summer of 1974, the village lay quiet beneath a pale sky that seemed unwilling to warm the earth. The roads were dusty, lined with stones worn smooth by the steps of generations, and the smell of damp hay mixed with wood smoke lingered even as the fields began to green. Life moved slowly, marked by the sound of roosters at dawn, the clatter of buckets at the communal well, and the laughter of children running barefoot across the meadows. Among those children was Annabella, a small girl of 7 with wide brown eyes and a voice as light as the morning breeze. She was the youngest of 3 siblings, the only daughter of Matteo and Clara, who had waited many years for her after the birth of 2 boys. Annabella was cherished not only for her sweetness, but also for the fragile brightness she brought to a home often shadowed by hardship. The family lived in a modest stone house on the edge of the village, surrounded by a garden of sunflowers that Clara tended faithfully, believing they kept sorrow away. Matteo worked long hours in the fields, his hands thick with calluses, his back stooped from carrying more burdens than his body could bear. Yet he always found the strength to lift Annabella onto his shoulders when he returned home, listening as she sang little songs she invented, her laughter drifting across the yard like music. The well stood at the heart of the village, a deep and ancient thing lined with stones blackened by years of water and moss. It had been there longer than anyone remembered, older than the church, older than the square where the men gathered at dusk. Children were warned not to play too close to it, for the stones were slippery and the cover often shifted with the weather. Mothers repeated the warnings in stern voices, but children, in their curiosity, often forgot. Annabella was not a reckless child. She was thoughtful and gentle, yet she loved the well for the way her voice echoed when she called into its depths. She liked to imagine it as a secret place where her words could travel and live forever. On the morning of her death, the sky was heavy with a storm that had not yet broken. Clara had sent Annabella to fetch water, accompanied by her older brother Marco, who was 12 and easily distracted by the boys playing with a ball in the square. "Stay close to your sister," Clara had warned, but Marco, eager to prove himself, ran off for just a moment, certain nothing could happen in the brief time he was away. Annabella stood by the well, humming to herself as she lowered the bucket, her small hands gripping the rope that was frayed from years of use. A slip of her foot on the damp stone, a cry that echoed once and then was silenced, and the village was changed forever. By the time Marco heard the splash and ran back, shouting her name until his voice broke, it was too late. Villagers came running, men dropping their tools, women clutching aprons to their mouths. They lowered ropes. They shouted prayers. They pulled until their arms ached. But when they lifted Annabella from the dark water, her body was limp, her face pale as the clouds above. Clara arrived with a scream that pierced the square, tearing at her hair as she fell to her knees, gathering the small body to her chest. The water soaked her dress, and the mud clung to her hands. Matteo came soon after, his face hollow, his strength crumbling as he saw the child he had carried on his shoulders lying still, her eyes closed forever. The village fell silent. Bells rang from the church, though no service had been planned, their sound carrying across the fields like a lament. In those days, death was not a stranger to the villagers. Illness and accident had claimed many. Yet the loss of a child struck differently. It felt like a theft, a cruelty too sharp to accept. Neighbors brought food to the family's home, though no one ate. Women washed Annabella's body, combed her hair, and dressed her in the white cotton dress she had worn the previous Easter. Clara sat beside her all night, unable to close her daughter's eyes, whispering stories as if the child still listened. Matteo sat outside, chain-smoking until his fingers trembled, staring at the ground as if answers might appear in the dust. The funeral was held the next day. The church, usually half empty, was filled to its corners with villagers who spoke little, their silence heavier than words. The priest's voice trembled as he spoke of innocence and the mysterious will of God. But few found comfort in those phrases. Clara clung to the coffin, refusing to let it be closed, until Matteo gently, almost angrily, pulled her away, his own grief raw and dangerous. The procession to the cemetery wound through the fields, children walking silently beside their parents, frightened by the sight of their playmate now still enshrouded. The grave was dug near the edge, under an old oak tree that leaned as if listening. As the earth fell upon the small coffin, Clara collapsed, and it was only the arms of her sisters that kept her from being buried with her child. In the weeks that followed, the family's home grew unbearably quiet. Marco, tormented by guilt, avoided his parents' eyes, certain they blamed him, though they never said the words. He dreamed of the moment he turned away, of Annabella's voice echoing into the well, and he woke with tears soaking his pillow. The youngest boy, Luca, only 9, wandered the house in confusion, clutching Annabella's doll as though it might bring her back. Matteo returned to the fields but worked without purpose, each movement mechanical, his strength used only to exhaust himself so he could collapse into a sleep that never truly rested him. Clara stopped tending the garden. The sunflowers drooped and withered, their heads heavy until the yard looked like a field of mourning. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice was hoarse, as if grief had burned her throat. Villagers tried to comfort them, but grief made the family unreachable, enclosed in an invisible wall. Children no longer played near the well. Some avoided the square altogether. Mothers tightened their grip on small hands whenever they passed, and fathers muttered about building a safer cover, though weeks passed before anything was done. The well itself seemed darker, its water no longer refreshing, but bitter with memory. Life in the village resumed its slow rhythm, but beneath the surface, sorrow lingered. Matteo drank more than before, sitting alone in the tavern at night, his silence more frightening than anger. Clara spent hours in Annabella's room, folding and refolding the small dresses, pressing them to her face as if they still held her daughter's scent. Marco withdrew from his friends, ashamed to laugh, ashamed to live, while Luca grew quiet, retreating into a world of imagination where he believed Annabella played with him still. Seasons turned. The storm that had threatened on the day of her death never broke, as if the sky itself had been silenced by grief. Summer dried into autumn, fields turned golden, then brown. The village held festivals, children ran again, but the family of Matteo and Clara remained marked, as though a shadow followed them wherever they walked. Years later, villagers would still speak of that day, of the little girl who slipped and was lost, of the wail of her mother, of the way the well seemed cursed afterward, though they knew it was only an accident. For the family, time dulled nothing. Matteo carried his sorrow like a stone in his chest, Clara like a wound that refused to close. Marco grew into a man, but guilt remained etched into his face, while Luca left the village young, perhaps in search of a place where the air was not heavy with memory. Annabella remained forever 7, forever bright-eyed, forever singing to the depths of a well that answered with silence.